Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. We've got an absolutely wild one for you today. We're going to break down a bizarre personal anecdote from our source material that actually starts off sounding like a chilling ghost story. But then, bam, it rapidly explodes into this incredibly profound philosophical argument about the very nature of belief itself. We're diving into a fascinating text by an author named Yu Feng, who literally takes a simple question about time and space and turns it into this sweeping, epic exploration of human faith. You won't want to miss where this goes.
So take a look at this quote right here. Others may doubt, I believe. This simple, powerful phrase is basically the anchor for our entire explainer today. As we unpack this text, you're going to see how these few words became the ultimate, rock-solid conclusion to a deeply unexplained, frankly mind-bending phenomenon. We're going to trace the exact steps that led someone to declare this with such absolute certainty and, what the author thinks it means for the rest of us.
All right, Section 1, the premonition dream. Okay, let's dive into this.
So the source text kicks off with this incredibly relatable but definitely eerie story. A friend from Tianjin comes to visit the author's office, and he is just deeply unsettled. He lays out this crazy timeline. Point 1, during the night, he has this super vivid dream where his grandfather appears and specifically tells him, "I fainted on the toilet, I couldn't get up, and I'm leaving this world." Literally the very next day, point 2, he gets a devastating phone call from his dad in China. His grandfather passed away. But here's the kicker, point 3, the part that absolutely shakes this friend to his core. His dad confirms that the grandfather collapsed and died exactly as described in the dream, while using the toilet. The exact match of time, physical space, and those deeply specific details, it left the friend utterly bewildered. I mean, how on earth could a dream perfectly mirror a tragic reality happening halfway across the world?
Which brings us to Section 2, Beyond Physical Space. Now, while the friend is totally reeling from the mystery of the whole thing, the author of our text does a complete pivot. He offers a highly specific, very structured, and entirely non-scientific explanation. To him, this wasn't some spooky mystery, it was just mechanics. Let's look at how he maps this out. Step 1, the grandfather simply leaves this physical space. Step 2, he enters what the author calls another dimension of life. And Step 3, right before fully departing, he taps into the friend's elevated spiritual sensitivity to convey his inner thoughts. Seriously, the text shows the author acting like this is just business as usual. He explains it as a totally normal transfer of what he uniquely calls negative universe information, kind of like tuning into an unseen energetic radio frequency. To him, it's not magic, it's just a different kind of physics, spiritual physics, if you will.
So having casually laid out this wild framework, the author looks at his friend and asks a very direct question. Do you believe in the immortality of the soul and in the existence of other dimensions? And the friend, totally grounded by this undeniable, visceral personal experience he just had, replies with steadfast certainty. He says, "While others may doubt, I believe."
Moving right along, Section 3, The Power of Belief. Taking that personal confirmation from his friend, the author uses it as a massive springboard. The text completely transitions from this one eerie anecdote into a huge, sweeping philosophical discourse on the power of faith itself. He immediately brings up this famous biblical analogy. You know, the story of Peter, right? The disciple of Jesus. The author points out that with belief, Peter does the impossible. He literally walks on water. But the very second he looks around and is confronted by the wind and the crashing waves, the physical, harsh realities of the world, he doubts. And what happens? He immediately begins to sink. The text uses this to drive home the point that belief actively grants you power, while doubt brings immediate, dangerous vulnerability. And this brilliantly illustrates the stark, uncompromising contrast the author paints between a believer and a doubter. Over on the left side, folks with belief are described as having deep roots. They are the people who actually know how to navigate life. But in stark contrast on the right side, those without faith, the text compares them to floating duckweeds, or, get this, insects flying randomly like headless flies. Yikes, right? The author is establishing a very rigid black and white binary here. Faith is the absolute, non-negotiable grounding force of human existence. The text keeps this rapid-fire comparison going, and I mean, he leaves absolutely zero room for any middle ground. On the left, having faith brings humility and promises this bright, radiant future. On the right, a lack of faith is straight up equated with arrogance, leading to a completely bleak and dark future. For the author, it's pretty simple. Your alignment with belief dictates the entire trajectory of your character and, ultimately, your destiny.
All right, Section 4, Belief versus Doubt.
So, okay,
If belief is this vital, the obvious question we have to ask is, what exactly are we supposed to be putting our faith in? This is the climax of the author's argument. He launches into this rapid, intense sequence of repetitive questions to really force the reader to think about where their trust lies. The very first question he aggressively demands we ask ourselves is simply, what to believe in?
And surprisingly, especially given the heavy spiritual vibe of the text so far, his very first answer is incredibly grounded. He writes, "Believe in facts. Believe in what you see, hear, and experience." The crucial point here is that, in this framework, profound spiritual belief doesn't mean ignoring reality. Actually, scratch that, it paradoxically starts with grounded empirical facts, just like the undeniable cold hard facts of the friend's dream matching up perfectly with reality.
Keeping that high momentum going, the text fires off the next big question: whom to believe in?
Now here, the author takes a remarkably broad, totally multi-faith approach. The text advises believing in the words of Jesus, Buddha, Muhammad, Laozi, and the great sages. What's fascinating is that the author neutrally positions these figures, not as competing exclusive dogmas, but as this collective, harmonious chorus of ancient wisdom that a true believer should actively be drawing upon. And then, bam! The author hits us with the final question in this rapid-fire sequence: what else to believe in?
This is where he brings the whole thing full circle, right back to those spiritual mechanics we talked about earlier. The author urges belief in that unseen spiritual data, that negative universe information we supposedly sense with our spiritual perception. Ultimately, he points directly toward a unifying higher power, which the text emphasizes as the greatest creator.
So the really crucial point here is that the author isn't just cheerleading for faith. He is actively, firmly warning against the modern pitfalls of doubt. He categorizes these threats so clearly. Doubting everything? That simply strips you of all self-confidence. Letting yourself be swayed by shifting opinions? That's going to slowly erode your faith. Having a half-hearted belief? That basically leaves you entirely unanchored, just waiting to be devoured the second life storms hit. And finally, opportunistic belief? Believing only when it's convenient or benefits you. He dismisses that entirely as just meaningless lip service. Without genuine faith, the author practically begs the question, how can a person even live?
To counter all these weak, flimsy forms of faith, the source material impartially lists a whole roster of historical and religious exemplars as the absolute ultimate models for standing firm. Whether it is the enduring, famous patience of Job, or the Apostle Paul from the Bible, the enlightened bodhisattvas of Buddhism, or the devout believers in Islam, the author points to all these figures to prove that steadfast faith is this universal human achievement, capable of weathering literally any storm you can imagine.
All of this intense analysis leads the author to this definitive, rock-solid core thesis. Without faith, one cannot stand firm. This right here is the ultimate takeaway of the text. The author completely bridges the gap between the deeply, mysteriously spiritual and the highly, practically grounded. He argues that faith isn't just some abstract concept for the afterlife. It's the baseline foundational requirement for just existing and navigating the physical world effectively.
Which brings us to our final section, the ultimate question.
Now let's bring this vast, sweeping, philosophical argument all the way back to earth, back to that friend from Tianjin, just sitting in the author's office. Armed with this whole new, deep framework of belief, the author gives his friend one final piece of advice. He frames that eerie dream not just as some spooky anomaly, but as a direct, undeniable personal revelation. He basically tells his friend, look, while the rest of the world might harbor their doubts, you simply cannot afford to. To doubt the dream, he argues, would be a literal betrayal of his grandfather's final wishes, and a total rejection of a genuine spiritual gift.
Reassured by this profound explanation, we revisit the friend's final confirmation. And notice, he doesn't just tentatively agree or nod along. He asserts his position with absolute finality. The text shows the completion of his journey, from a state of total, bewildering confusion to one of just unshakable certainty. He declares, while others may harbor doubts, I remain steadfast in my belief.
The author uses this powerful, intimate moment of personal transformation to turn the lens right back outward. After taking us through the wild mechanics of the afterlife, the dangerous pitfalls of doubt, and the intense grounding power of genuine faith, the text ends by speaking directly to the reader. And so, drawing verbatim from the very final line of our source material, I'm going to leave you to ponder this ultimate question. Friend, do you also believe?